This is The Change Physician, episode 173. Welcome back to The Change Physician. I am Melissa Katie, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, for our episode 173, which, we're just going to start on a conversation we just couldn't help but pop on and record because I think it's a very relevant conversation to have with any human being on a lot of topics. But in particular, we started off with just this thought of how much effort we put, or maybe the awareness, I'll put it on me, that I had not a clue on, maybe because I didn't understand myself well enough. So that's kind of important, but being aware of what really matters in like a relationship, for example. So I'll say from my point of view, you want me to give my example, Kevin?
Sure, you give your example.
Okay. I'll keep it short, but if that's possible. So I think I was so keen on just finding someone to love me. I didn't think of it like that, but I think emotionally I was just felt this like, if I love somebody or I'm attracted to them and they love me back, and that's another question. Are they going to love you in the way you think people who love someone, or how are they going to behave? I thought if they reciprocate love, that's the right choice. But day-to-day life reminds you that there are certain things that can get under your skin. And you start realizing, despite the fact you're so attracted to this person, who probably the thing you're attracted to is the very thing that bugs you later. I'll say that from experience, that you don't realize it till you get through that initial couple years, and you don't realize that there are little things in life can create the most happiness or unhappiness, especially when they're repeated over and over every single day. So that was very generic kind of thing, but maybe just like roommate, like who's tidy, who's not tidy, What are your thoughts?
And that discussion triggered kind of like why we decided to record, because it made me think of the fact that in most major life decisions, I think people put more time and effort into buying a car than they do to work on these life decisions. And these are things such as, oftentimes that includes health. I would include like psychological health and emotional health in there. Like who actually wants to spend time learning about emotions? Well, I do. I think it's interesting. But these are fundamental things that can make massive societal impact and personal impact. In fact, greater than societal impact, obviously personal impact. And yet we put so little time of it. And the big one is relationships. And my comment was basically the fact that we have had multiple episodes now with different guests as well, and who your mate is matters. I mean, that makes such a huge impact. And that how often do we actually investigate what it is to have a therapeutic relationship? Now, we just did a couple of episodes on this, on some more topics of it, but really, we've been fed this bull garbage thing that somehow things are supposed to just come easy. Like you look across the room and you see the person and there's this instant thing, and you just knew from looking across the room that was the one. No, you didn't. You may have looked across the room and had this instant connection, and that may have been a connection, but that doesn't mean they're the right spouse for you. Now, right. if they end up being later on, I guarantee it wasn't. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me.
It was probably their loins talking to them.
Yeah, it was probably their loins talking to them, but it just simply isn't necessarily true, or unless you want to believe in this, like everything's fixed in the world, like the whole pattern of the universe is we're just kind of playing along, but nothing that we do actually matters. And so I'm just kind of, it's amazing, like how many people actually have read a relationship book before they had problems in a relationship.
Yeah. That's a good question.
How many people have investigated communication, interpersonal communication, before you actually needed it?
Yeah.
And yet, I can guarantee you, like, just talking to friends or family or whatever, people will spend hours looking up details on a car. It could be the coolest car in the world, blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, it is a meaningless thing. That car is going to get old. You're probably going to get a new one. In the long term of things, it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to again, health, finances, interpersonal relationships, and your choice of spouse, those things make that, I mean, those are without a doubt are going to have a massive impact on your long-term health, well-being, happiness, satisfaction. And so I don't know, why aren't we putting more time in there?
Yeah. I was going to say that one of the quotes on one of these old posters I have, for some reason, I just love quotes anyway. And so I've had this for like decades. But one of the quotes I'll never forget, it just says, the most important decision you'll ever make is who you marry.
That's a great quote. And I think that should be tattooed on everybody's forehead.
Yeah.
Like literally.
Yeah. No, here's the thing. You just talked about cars. So let's just take that analogy. And, you know, we don't do enough upfront. And granted, I don't think a lot of us have the awareness or the teachings or the guidance to really put that kind of value or that importance. Most of the time we see a lot of kids just growing up in bad, you know, households, you know, they just say they don't want that anymore. Are you going to say something?
Well, I was going to, and that's understandable, right? Because we also talk about the importance of environment, modeling, mentoring, and if you, so I don't want anybody to think about that. I'm saying, oh, well, you made a bad choice. And if you got divorced or whatever, that's ultimately because you were a stupid person. It is not, right? If you are unaware, you are unaware, right? So that, unless, you know, kind of stumble into things, that awareness is really, really key.
Right.
And I'm not going to neglect, there's people, if you've come out of a traumatic relationship or a traumatic household, then I think it's even more, important to at least have awareness to say, this is not how I want my life to live. So where can I focus my intention and invest my intention in such a way to make a change so that I don't regress or duplicate the behavioral patterns that were around me? Because there's a good chance you're going to model those unless you consciously try to make an effort to change.
Yeah. Well, I will personally say that I was definitely naive and a type of pleasing personality, which is a bad, dangerous combination when you're not in a healthy relationship. And so hence 13 years in an unhealthy relationship, and probably stubborn and don't like to give up, and have always, you know, been successful at anything I put my mind to, you know, like I know my parents probably didn't want me to get married to this person, but by golly, I'm going to make sure that I am successful and don't end up divorced, because I'm not from a divorced family. So that's probably what internal subconscious workings was going on. But what you're saying about the car and the amount of time you invest in it it's fascinating, because you don't realize that at ground zero, the influence that's going on from that person, if they're not good for you. And sometimes it's so insidious. And if you're going to get divorced, you know, you might have to give up half your stuff, give it to the other person. You find a lemon for a car, you know, you don't have to give up half your stuff. Like it's a totally different level of commitment and just really liability from you, like emotionally, financially, when it comes to who you choose as a mate versus like a car. Like you probably can turn it in, get some value for it, get some money for it, versus the other way around where you're probably losing some money, have to pay attorney fees. And I mean, that's just a very superficial comment about
the costs are greater.
Much greater.
Yeah.
And I just wish it's like you just want to drop a few drops of awareness on people. But you know that I remember people probably trying to get across to me that this is probably not a good relationship, but I don't want to hear it, you know, denial or whatever. But I wish I had that moment of awareness that happened like maybe 12 years sooner. I don't know. That's probably just because I was a workaholic in my residency and fellowship and everything. So it was easier to ignore the
warning signs.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, I mean, I think that's one example of, you know, investing time in things that matter. And I think relationships, my gosh, I think of what's missed out on education for children and wealth education, relationship education, personal development education. I think there's some huge issues structurally with how our society train. I mean, great, I don't have kids, but I hear from the outside kind of what they're having to test if they're taking and all of that. But I think of just the investment portion, like we're trained in society to first plan on going into an occupation, and many times just trading your time for money. I mean, how many people raise their children to be entrepreneurs and or to understand, personally develop themselves and understand what their strengths and likes are, and to build in some kind of entrepreneurial skills through that process so that they're not always trading their time for money and start building wealth when time is on their side. Like, I wish I'd had that kind of like ingrained in my head, but I had a family that was traditionally, go to college and, all those things. So did I prepare myself by like building stuff from my teens and 20s and 30s into things that can compound interest? No. So.
Yeah. And that's sort of the conundrum, right? So where do you learn this stuff?
Yeah.
And it would be great if we had like, if in education, they could balance it out. Like, I'm thinking, okay, I'm kind of remembering high school for me. I think we still had home ec classes. I don't remember if we had a financial class that I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
My wife said that she had a basic finance class in high school. My kids, that I don't think I've seen. Now, granted, I haven't gone through the whole list on it, but it's sort of fallen by the wayside
Mm-hmm.
with all this stuff. And then some people will say, when it just, let's talk about relationships and sex, and then just how we say those words, and then people get up in arms about in education, and their thing is, well, that's a job for me at home. Well, if you're not doing it at home, or your home is, and you don't have an awareness to recognize that your home is a freaking crap show,
Mm-hmm.
then again, we're I don't know where the place to be. I think ultimately, if we had like a way that we could set, you have foundational education, and then there was an option, there was a way to people have to apply the principles of they should be learning
Mm-hmm.
in education in such a way that it actually transfers into life skills. That makes a lot more sense. So like math should then be involved with things like basic financial skills. Right? You can incorporate finance into math, because math is the language of finance, in easy ways. Like as you progress, you can learn about compounding interest. That'd be one. Yeah. You can start, you can just learn about like addition and subtraction. You could use that as your piggy bank analogy. When we're looking at English and you're looking at historical like constructs, when you're kind of looking about like to be social and historical issues, there'd be ways to pull in these ideas about relationships and communication.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we've mentioned this before, is all of us, there's three different levels, right? There's the micro, there's the macro, and then there's the meta level on this stuff. So when it comes to relationship and communications, on a micro level, that's you and your spouse or loved one. On a macro level, that becomes your family unit and perhaps your close friends. But on a meta level, we're actually talking about the way that societies deal with each other. How are these societies comparing and contrasting? How are they communicating in such a way? How are they recognizing the other society's perspective? And it wouldn't be just Dr. Cuccaro throwing stuff out here to, it doesn't seem to me that would be too hard to do.
Right.
If you had the wherewithal to do it, the teacher understood some of these concepts about communication, and then could bring them in and wrap them into these individual, these specific types of disciplines. Yeah, that I don't know. That would be I would think the ideal way is actually then being able to take these core foundational concepts and then apply them and demonstrate them through these specific types of disciplines, rather than, just memorize whatever. But because I do think people are coming out of our high schools and just like unprepared for life, right? Now,
Yeah.
how many people are decompensating when they go to college because they've had their parents make all their decisions for them?
Yeah.
I'm astounded at the number of people, like, this is just blowing my mind, who are doing their kids' homework or micromanaging their kids so much that their kids aren't having an opportunity to actually make a decision and potentially quote unquote fail. Like, you want your kids to make bad decisions in things like elementary school, because as you get down the process, those decisions start having a bit greater impact, and that culminates into things like college and then in your professional life. So I mean, it's just amazing to me.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because what's at the core of that? The question is, I mean, I don't think it's just that you don't believe your child can accomplish it. I mean, even if they're struggling with it, well, sometimes you have to work a little harder to eventually kind of get it, and maybe they never will be great at it, but it's reflective of where their, potential weaknesses are not as strong in certain areas. But it makes you wonder about, is this a reflection of you worried about what people think about you as a parent, and that you don't have a smart kid, or that you failed them, or trying to make it convenient so they move on so you're not, embarrassed, if they don't move on to the next grade? Like, I mean, you have to wonder, you have to be aware of yourself. Why are you doing this? Like, if you're not aware of the fact that in order to build resilience and strengths and competencies and skills, you have to struggle. If you don't realize you have to struggle in order to get better, then there's a problem there. I mean, you can be there to kind of jog the mind together, but not do it for them. I mean, there's a way to help guide, just like a teacher would with children, without doing the actual stuff. No, but I think there's an awareness issue on that point of why you're doing it, and understanding who you are. And I mean, none of us are perfect. I mean, I get that, but I think you have to. I don't think it's an easy thing for parents. Like, I think it always is hard to see them struggle.
No, it's not easy for anybody in any of things. Like, I kind of in trying to figure out, because then we're incorporating, if we're talking about communication, now we're kind of moving into this idea about resiliency and failure. And specifically to parenting, we have all these extrinsic things, like there's all these comparisons. Oh, such and such is doing this with their kids, and blah, 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 are doing that with that. So there's this extrinsic and sort of like that's kind of the Joneses thing. But then there's also this intrinsic factor about, well, you want what's best for your kids. And then there's this fight between action and inaction, right? Because if you don't take an action and then something happens, then you're like, oh my God, if I had done this, the results would be different. Maybe from a parenting standpoint, maybe if I put my kids in through private school the entire time and spent that extra $150,000 and bankrupted myself, they would be super successful, or because people do that. Like they're and so it is a very challenging scenario. I think a lot of it then comes down to what my default would be. Well, then investigate it. We're in a world where we can research this stuff. If you have questions about parenting, research the parenting. That's an important decision. The things that you do, how you parent your child matters.
Yes.
Don't strictly rely on how you were raised. Yes. Even if you think it was the best thing in the world. That we talked about the relationship standpoint. I can't think of, outside of that relationship, the how you parent is probably the most, or on equal par to that, because that's sort of the propagation of the species and propagation of behaviors associated with it. So I'm not saying it's easy, for sure. I mean, I've spent there many times when you're just sort of like, you're sitting on the brink and you're going, okay, I don't know if this is the right choice. I don't know if this is the right choice. I don't know, I could do something, but I don't want to micromanage. And I'll tell you, in my family, I feel like it was the right choice, because my kids are pretty self-sufficient and doing really well. But I also spent a lot of time, I think I could have spent more time learning about parenting, but when my kids were younger, as always, like where in hindsight, I wish I had started before we had kids, rather than when they were, earlier, and particularly when it came to like learning. But I did, at least I recognize that. And it's just again, it is just crazy when you look at people, look at all this time trying to buy an out for a pair of shoes. And then a car. People will spend all this time like a car. I think sometimes housing, and maybe I'm just reflecting on this because our first housing purchase was like the dumbest thing ever. And we should have probably spent more time kind of really spending some time about that. And then and it's just like this hierarchy. I think sometimes wonder that the more important these decisions are, sometimes we don't want to invest the actual time that's needed in them because it seems like too much work. And so we just want to go with the gut, and relationships is, I think, one of them. And sometimes parenting. I mean, how many people think parenting should just be inherent? Like you're like a mother goose and just, it comes out in your genes. And come on, man, be better. Like I had a fantastic mother. My mom is the best, but I'm going to try to do better than she did, because that's, that way we keep trying to move this better line, not the best. I'm looking at the best. I'm just trying to make things better for the generation after me.
It's like a personal development on a scale of like generational development. Like every generation hopefully kind of enhances each other and gets smarter and wiser. And granted, times change and you have to always adapt to new things. But what are you going to say?
Well, because this comes down to these core concepts, right? This comes down to failure in learning versus failure as being this horrible, awful thing. And me being a pretty fixed mindset person most of my life, I have to actively pursue that kind of growth mindset that it's effort and failure is learning aspect to it. But it's like all this stuff. If you have something that's important and it doesn't go well, learn from it.
Yeah.
I think, and I brought this up in relationship issues, because my parents got divorced, I was always very conscious of relationships pretty early on. And so maybe sometimes we beat myself up, but I wouldn't say it was too bad about like, well, if a relationship ended, what was good, what was not? What can I learn from it? And I can literally stair step through relationships, things that I learned with each one. This goes to yours, is the opposite of this is when we get so stubborn and we're like, I'm just going to do this because we're not supposed to be quitters, right? Like that's the other thing. You got to persist, and persistence is fantastic. But the whole balancing act of life is knowing when it makes sense to invest your attention and effort someplace else.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, you want to persist in the relationship. On the other hand, there's times when it makes sense to divest. I think there's if you come from a family where everybody's married and all the pressure is to stay married, it becomes very, very difficult if the marriage is fundamentally flawed and unhealthy for the participants to exit. Instead, they stay together. On the other hand, children of divorce are more likely to get divorced themselves. And I think in some ways that has a tendency because relationships are hard work. And so they see it as such as, well, if the relationship isn't going easy, obviously this isn't the right relationship for me. I need to exit it. And so rather than putting the work in, they exit. So it's, I don't know, because the long and short of it, and really what I would hope is the takeaway from this particular episode is really invest the time and effort into things that matter and recognize that those key things are your health, your financial decision, and by far is the relationship and communication pieces. And then what happens when you do that is even if a relationship or interpersonal, if there's struggle there, you can learn from it and improve so that the next time it gets better, rather than flounder around and just go from person to person to person, or, they're not the one. I hate that word, but I just can't stand it when people even say I just knew they were the one. Really, out of 7 billion people, somehow this person who lives in the same geographic location close to you that you randomly walked into is by far the defining person of your life. Come on, it's just foolish.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was thinking about many times people they can make they may have made a good choice, but maybe not based on their invested time to understand. For example, I happened to buy a house that maybe I didn't put a ton of investment time into figuring out, but I got lucky. And it just happened to be a good choice for me. But I would say that it's probably best to, veer towards a side of more awareness and pursuing better investigation and understanding so that your odds are elevated to a better choice.
That's the thing you have control over. The luck in some situations you don't. And that's a whole nother episode right there,
Yeah.
because there's people discount the importance of luck in a lot of things.
Oh yeah. Even
so-
marriage. Some people get lucky and choose the right person, and they didn't put a lot of invested time into it.
Yeah. Although I would be kind of interested, because I would like to know what the backgrounds of the people who end up falling into that, because because then we're talking about conscious and unconscious, and being aware and unaware. And if you're modeling, if you aren't aware, but you come from a pretty stable environment with really, really healthy relationships, I guarantee you're modeling those same behaviors, even if you're not aware of them.
Right.
So it'd be interesting, but I'm definitely agreeing with you on the point of luck, because luck is, there's a lot more luck. And in a future discussion, we talk about how people tend to minimize luck and say this person's super successful because of all the things they did, not recognizing the importance of luck. And I'm not just saying that. That's like, if you look at Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, he's done he thinks that's one of the most important things that people miss is luck. Like, there was an element to the super successful that is simply has to be attributed to luck, and so it's not all like they're major gods of their decisions. They make great choices and they've worked really hard, but there's a lot of people who have worked as hard that may not have that quote unquote external success as much, and luck does play a role there.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about investing the time in the things that matter.
Yeah. Well, I think we've hit on not just intimate relationships, but wealth accumulation as far as what you invest your time in, parenting. Hopefully each kid you have, you probably get better and better. Let's hope, if you're paying attention.
It's still different. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. And even the child that's trying to learn things, you got to invest the time to be better at it. So your children can also, when it comes to learning skills, you need to invest the time if you really want to hone those skills. So we talked resilience, but just whatever skills as an adult or a child, all of those things apply, I think, when you're dealing with where you're investing your time. So any other last comments you want to say before we head out of this episode?
Now, other than sometimes it can seem a little bit overwhelming, but just taking the first step, like I guess relationships to me is the one that we should focus on. I don't think anybody listen. If anybody's listening to this and they're going, yes, that's what you should do, they're probably, because they're already in the process of doing it. Somebody else is going, well, that's not important to me. Finances, for whatever reason, is one that people really seem to struggle with. And I see, in physician forum, I don't know what to do, how to invest my money. I got all this sticking in it. And it's like, literally the time you spent to Google this or to stick it in a forum question, Google basic financial skills or how to invest or best financial decisions in Google, and you're going to start finding some information. And you can't trust everything on on the internet, obviously, but at least you can start establishing that. So if you have the question and you're struggling, rather than throwing up your hands in the air, I don't know what to do with kids, or I don't know how to parent. We are in this amazing environment. We have like all this knowledge in front of us here. Use it. Just take a couple steps and do it, and start from there. So,
yeah, we're in that information inundation age.
So then that's the second thing, which we're not going to talk about in this particular one, is how to ask good questions. Right. Yeah. So it all comes down is how do you ask the question? How do you frame those questions in that way to get the right answers, or the answers that are most appropriate for you?
Good point. I have nothing else to add. You pretty much are summing it up.
All right. You want me to take it out then?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for another episode of The Changed Physician. We hope that you are investing your time and attention in the things that matter rather than investing in the matterless things. And as always, if you would like to invest yourself into our community, you can join us at thechangedphysician.com, whether you're a physician or physician ally. And until next time, stay well.
Take care.